Welcome to the Jacksonport Historical Society program about growing up and going to school in Jacksonport. My name is Dawn Hunold. I am the interim president at this point at the Historical Society, and I am here to not only welcome you, but also to introduce you to Mike Madden. He will then tell you who's on our panel tonight with the discussion. Hope you enjoy it.
Thank you, Dawn. Thank you for coming to celebrate a time we need to document and be grateful for. I'd like to start the program by showing thanks for the opportunity of growing up in a wholesome time in a great country by starting this meeting the same way we started each day of school. We said the Pledge of Allegiance, and I have a former student here, Kathy Butler, who's going to lead us in the pledge. The flag is over there. Got a little housekeeping to go through first. Thanks for this program must be directed to the program mastermind, Lynn Wilson, the advertising chief, Phyllis Zatlin, and the creator of our main research tool, Jacksonport Through the Generations, Schools and Teachers. From this point on, I'll just refer to this as the book. Okay. And that was organized and a lot of it authored by Eileen Roberts. We're also very lucky to have a professional film master and producer, Laddie Chapman, here. Laddie, how will people be able to view your work?
After I get it posted, it'll be a couple days. They can go to the internet site doorbell.net/video, and it'll be one of the videos at the top of the page, if not the first one.
And if I'm not mistaken, Phyllis will find a way to sell this eventually. And speaking of Phyllis, she has a few words for us now about her display in the back. Phyllis?
Okay. And you'll cut me off when I've gone on too long. We have lots of good things here, and I'm hoping to sell a lot of it so that there's space in my house again. We have the famous dock poster. If you don't own it, you'll want to. We have these wonderful seriographs that Joe Cook made of Fred Erskine paintings. And I didn't know they existed until a couple years ago. There's a series of 4, and they're priced for you to want to buy all 4, but you can buy just one if you like. We have all the books, thanks to Eileen Roberts' work over the years, and you'll be particularly interested in the one about the schools. So we have extra copies of that. And we have some people here that you'll want to meet. Marilyn Hine is here, and she put together this wonderful book of photos her grandfather took of World War I when he was in Europe. And then Minnie is here, and we have his CDs. And you can buy them and take them home and enjoy his piano music whenever you need to relax and forget your problems. So we have all these good things, and I'd be happy to see you. We'd all be happy to see you after the program.
Thank you, Phyllis, and thank the audience for wearing masks. It's much appreciated. We've got a long way to go in this COVID thing yet, and in the words of the Queen of England, stay calm and carry on. I'll introduce the panel of speakers as we go through the 4 school districts. Your stories will be welcomed and appreciated after we hear from this illustrious cast of speakers up here. Lynn's our timekeeper. If you hear that bell, finish up your story, okay? I'm going to start by giving the first story is a letter from my sister, Sheila Ann Madden. And I have a picture of myself in first grade in the middle and my sister Sheila and Bill on the outside. I'm sorry we don't have scan capability tonight. We have a few photos that Laddie scanned early for us, but we can't do that, and there will be several things that will be referred to, and you're welcome to look at after the program. Sheila's letter will set the tone of the personal stories that we hope to preserve tonight. I attended the Jacksonport School for grades 1 to 7 between 1952 and 1959. In 1952, the one-room school housed all grades 1 to 8. There were 6 or 7 of us first graders, and we sat in the farthest row away from the windows. My brother Bill was in 4th grade, and he sat in the middle rows. I was in awe of the big kids that sat by the windows. The 7th and 8th grade girls' pretty skirts cascaded all the way to the floor, and I couldn't wait for that to be me. The building was big and beautiful to me. The stairs were enormous and led to the boys' cloakroom to the right and the girls' cloakroom to the left. There were boys and girls' bathrooms down in the basement and a bubbler in the classroom. Mr. Guth was my first and second grade teacher. I remember the thrill of getting a large pink Dick and Jane workbook the first day. Younger children were called up to the front of the room and sat on small chairs for classes. Older students stayed in their desk, and we were always to raise our hand and get permission to speak. We had very good, hardworking teachers, Mr. Guth, Mr. Gerdman, Mr. Visti, Mrs. Anderson, and during my years in Jacksonport School. When we got to school in the morning, the blackboards were covered, one for each grade, with vocabulary words and phrases for each reading class. During the first recess, it would be all erased and ready for the 8th grade math class to use. We had continuous short classes all day. When you were not in class, you had to sit quietly in your desk and do your work. When work was done, you could get a book from the little library in the back of the room, or practice penmanship, spelling words, color, or listen to other classes quietly. If you needed to use the restroom, there was a procedure in place. In order not to disturb the teacher and the class being taught, one person at a time could quietly put their initials up in the corner of the chalkboard by the appropriate hall to go use the facilities. When returning, you would erase your initials and everyone would know the bathroom was available. Having the initials SAM, some of my friends would tease me, asking which restroom was I going to use. Sometimes the teachers read to all of us from a book of famous paintings and artists, and they had a large painting to hold up. Everyone looked forward to the Let's Sing program, and we had service of the Door County Bookmobile come to our school, and during summer months it would stop at the laundromat in town. School parties come to mind, and many fun times we had in school. In the first few years I was at school, we went back to school at night for the Halloween costume party. One year my mother made me a Little Red Riding Hood outfit out of red crepe paper. I carried a basket, and my dad found a small empty whiskey bottle to put in it, and he took us to the party. Another year I wore a lovely tan dress that may have been my mother's wedding dress. There were apples hanging from strings to try and bite, and bobbing for apples. Some years we had Christmas programs at the Jacksonport Town Hall. Recess was a great time. We had swings, teeter-totters, and a big slide. There were ball games and jump rope. In the winter, some of us played jacks inside on really cold days. Otherwise, we slipped snow pants under our dresses and played outside. Sometime in my later years of grade school, we became two-room school. There were enough students for having another classroom set up in the basement for grades 1 to 4. I think my 4 younger brothers, Mike, Pat, Sean, and Steve, may have been all in that classroom at the same time. For a while, there was a Mrs. Anderson in each of the classrooms. After consolidation with school took place, hot lunch was brought to our schools. That was exciting to us, and there was a machine in the hall that would dispense free milk. The oldest kids in the school would take turns serving the lunch and then receive a free lunch for working. The Jacksonport school was a great experience for me. My 8th grade and high school years were spent at Sevastopol. So she kind of summed up what we're after tonight, and we'll talk about the schools one by one. Lynn and I were very lucky to get an invitation to come to the Sevastopol Historical Society's records, where Linda Waite, Supervisor Linda Waite, had found some boxes when they tore down Sevastopol School that had records from Washington School, and the Sevastopol Historical Society is preserving those, and Linda Waite has done an inventory of them. Our first speakers tonight are going to be Diane LaPlant Kiehnau, who called me a smoozer when I was inviting her to be part of this panel, and Al Birnshein, who attended all 8 grades at Washington. Diane and Al, can you give us a few stories from your youth and from Washington School?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, okay. Okay. I went to Washington my first 4 grades. After that, I was transferred to Sevastopol because our school was, as they called it, condemned. A little closer? Okay. Is this better? Okay. And what I remember coming to school, I think one of the, because I was so young, but anyhow, my dad would have to bring me to school because we lived, I think it was, over 2 miles away. Your parents would bring you, and we walked home during the summer, or this, when the weather was nice, but otherwise in bad weather, my dad always brought me. In fact, on the way to school one time, I almost fell out of the car because he had a 47 Ford or Mercury, and that's when the handles were all in the middle, and I must have accidentally pressed on one, and he turned around and caught me. But then I would get to school, and who would come out and greet me was Freddie Drenberg. He'd come out and open the door, the car door for me, and let me, go inside. And in our school, the girls' cloakroom was to the right, so you immediately went in and hung up your jacket. And I can't remember. I know we wore dresses, I think, but we had to wear slacks underneath. So I can't remember if we kept our slacks on all day or not. But anyhow, you found your desk, and then for each class, as Mike mentioned with, from Sheila, we had a one-room school, and everyone had their own desk, but when it was your turn to go to your class, you went to the front, and there were little chairs around, and your own little class sat there. And I was one of 3. Milton Anschutz and Linda Warkaiser were my other classmates. And I have very fond memories of going to that school. I have no bad memories. It was a wonderful experience. I think we all learned from the older kids as well as our own classes, because we overheard things when we got our own work done. We had the basic classes, and art and music came over the radio, so I don't recall how we actually learned from that, but that's how it was. And we would have had a little library, and we had our, the old-time desks. I think they were all connected, if I remember. And you always had to bring a hanky to school with you. And then we each got our goiter pills, which I assume were iodine pills. They tasted awful. remember? But that would be unheard of nowadays. And recess, I know we had various, we probably had a slide and swings. Let's see.
Every once in a while, there'll be a picture flash on the screen that will show Diane dressing up for one of the programs.
Oh, yes. At Christmas time, the older boys set up a stage in the front, and I think we all had to participate. And I was the French doll whenever you see the stage and three students. The one on the left was Cheryl Kurtz, and the one on the right was Dora Warkaiser. It might be, oh, that's me right there, yes. And so anyhow, and then they had a Santa Claus and some kind of treats for all of us. But I have very, very fond memories. No bad memories at all from going to the one-room school.
Thank you, Diane. That's
And we had a big register in the middle of the school. If we had our wet mittens or wet clothing, we could all put it on that. So.
And there's some good stories in this book about Washington School.
Oh, and I should mention, I think my first grade teacher was Vicki Bly's mother, Mrs. Delore Olson. And then 2 other teachers were Nancy Stoll and then Joan, she would have been Joan Carmody, Joan Trinetsky, Joan Peterson.
Well, I was looking at Al's report card from Washington School, and he had very good marks except for behavior. Al, you want to tell us a little bit about that?
Okay. First of all, I got to get rid of this stupid thing. Anyway, bring a few memories back. I can still remember first time I went to school. Everybody hear me? Okay. My mother led me down the driveway and pointed to the south. And she said, when you get to the school, you've been here with Dad, and you walk that distance. I was first grade now, so I was a pretty little guy. And get to school, I had my lunch my lunch pail was a Caro syrup pail. What I had for sandwich in there, I don't remember. But back then, peanut butter was a great thing, and I just loved it. It was Leonard lard with salt and pepper on, made good sandwiches. Trust me, still makes a good sandwich. My first teacher was Irene Drenberg. Some of you might have known her. You have to look, I'm 81 years old, so I go back quite a ways. I think there's one person, probably a little older, that went to school. And she went to Farview. Anyway, I got some report cards here that I found when I was cleaning house a couple years ago. And it goes back, signed by Mrs. Drenberg. And then I had Henry Gilson, who was well known. He lived up at the top of apartment at Bly's Bar with the family. Karen Ash is one of the daughters. So anyway, my report cards are here, and going on, I got records up to the 3rd grade, and beyond that, I couldn't find anything else. I went all 8 years there, graduated from 8th grade in 1954. 1958, I graduated from Sebastopol High School. Some of the things that we did, played ball. Oh, one thing I got to bring up, we didn't have any bathrooms. We had 2 outhouses. One was for the boys, one was for the girls. That was your bathroom. And that was that way when the school was closed down in whenever it was closed. There was no running water. You had to carry the water. There was a new well at the school, but you had to carry water in, put it in the bubbler, and everybody could drink out of that. That was what we had, and it's the way it was, back then, that nobody thought anything of it. Today, you wouldn't get by with that, Some of the things we did, we had a baseball team, and one thing I can remember, I think it was Mrs. Delora Olson. We talked her into somehow getting a hold of the people up at Farview School. Well, that was a mistake because we got beat pretty bad by the Farview kids. Anyway, recess was always a good time. In the wintertime, we would make ourselves pretty much builders. The snowplow would pile big snow piles up alongside the road, and we'd take the shovel from down the basement that we used to put coal into the furnace, and we'd go out and we'd dig ourselves tunnels and make all kinds of rooms in there, and then when the snowplow would come along, they'd bust it down, we'd get mad at them, we'd have to go do it all over again. Those were some of the things that we did when we were in the grade school. You had to make use of something because you had 8 grades to go through, and the little kids were out there with the big kids. We're all together. Mike has got some things on here. He says some of your chores that were at home. Well, being raised on a farm, some of the things you did was help out in the barn. Probably when we were real young like that, you'd do the bedding for the cows and maybe scratch some silage in for the cows and give them some hay. And when you got a little bigger, Pa would send you up to climb the hay chute and go up in the barn and throw some hay down for the cows. And back then, the farmers didn't farm like they did today. The hay was timothy and brome grass and a little bit of alfalfa. There was no hay machines. You cut it with the mower and put it into long hay, and then they take it off the wagon and on the hay track up there. And the wintertime when you had to get it out, you pulled like hell to get it out because it was all mixed up and it wasn't short, it was all long stuff. And the bedding was the same way. So everything was done by hand. What else we got here? Some of the family gatherings and stuff we had. We always enjoyed the summertime and threshing time when you could go from farm to farm and have a good meal. And that was always something you looked forward to when you were young, be part of the threshing crew. Some of the classmates that I had, I'm thinking there's probably a few left. There's one of the fellows I went was Richard Howard. I'm pretty sure he's still alive. He lives down in Oklahoma City. The rest of my class is getting pretty well depleted. They're gone already.
Thank you, Al. The Washington School opened in 1885 and it continued until 1957. And I was very proud to see there was a Mrs. Marie Madden that taught there in 1942, but it said she lasted 6 days.
Mike, could you tell us the location of these schools, please?
Yes, Washington School is on the corner of County Trunk I and Ayler Road. And later on, I will introduce the person that lives there right now, which is kind of neat. So, we're going to move on to Groveland School now, which is school district number 3 that opened in 1881. And one of my favorite stories in the book is by the teacher Ted Hopner, who taught in Groveland School from 1937 to 1940. Coming to Groveland after 1 year of training at Algoma Normal School. Mr. Hopner truly enjoyed his assignment at Groveland, but said he started by wrestling 3 big farm boys that were bigger than him, Don Tidke, Carl Urban, and Urban Fluck. And Mr. Hopster also tells a real survival story about crossing the swamp to the east of school during a severe winter storm and nearly not making it to the Lagerquist farm that night. So for Groveland, we got panelists are Beverly Kiehnau Ozborn, who also called my convincing participation request a smoozing job. And Bill Schleicher that said he won't find too much to talk about, but if you know Bill like I know Bill, he will. And he's going to talk about the outhouse there too, I hope, too, Bill. So Beverly, would you start us out about Groveland School?
Sure. I went to Groveland all 8 years, and my classmates were Alvin Scherig, which still lives right down the road from here, and Kathy Schleicher, Bill's sister, and we are still all around. So, and then I graduated from Sevastopol High School. I would like to go over some things that other people haven't talked about. One thing was how we got to school back then. In the winter, well, we lived up on Elm Drive, and to get to Groveland, we could kind of, instead of doing the two sides of a triangle, we cut through the swamp. And, you know, we weren't so very tall then, so we'd walk through those big reeds, and you know, it was really warm down there. And we'd come out by the Stenzel driveway, and then we'd down the hill, and we were in the swamp, and that was warm. So it wasn't a bad walk to go to school or back home. Sometimes we'd be walking on the road, and a car would come. That might be Bill's dad or one of the other neighbors, and they had a lot of kids in there already, but they'd stop, we'd hop in, sit on somebody's lap, and away we'd go. Can you imagine doing that today? Another thing was some of the older boys had a bike, and I can remember riding on the handlebars of the bike and somebody else on the fender in the back. So there were 3 of us on the bike and only 1 pedaling, and I don't know how they did it. But once in a while we had a little accident. Came home with a few scrapes. In the winter time, well, we still walked all the time. But coming home, like they've mentioned, the snowbanks would be so high from the snowplows. So we were busy sliding down those snowbanks all the time. And I know my neighbor lady always said, you look like a snowman by the time you get home. We were just covered. And you know, in winter, the days are rather short. So we'd get home, and my brother and I were supposed to get the wood in for the house stove. Well, you know, when we got home, we just played and played and played outside until it was dark. And then we had to go into the woodshed and try and find wood, and there was no light in there. And we did that year after year. We never figured it out that we should do that first. At school, I too, like Diane, I have very, very fond memories of school, not one bad memory. And I loved Mrs. Anderson. She was my teacher for 8 years. And I guess that many of us really liked her because we all went on to be teachers, just like she was. And we would have lots of fun at recess. Some of the games we played were Red Rover, come over. I don't know, I think we held hands and people tried to break through. And if they got caught, I guess they were on your team or whatever. And out the front door of our school, we had a sidewalk, and we played hopscotch on there, which probably most of you know how to play. We'd play ante over the shanty. We'd have teams on either side of the school and throw the ball over the school. And if we caught it, we all ran and tried to catch the people on the other team. That's what I remember. I don't know, maybe that's not right. And like Elvin mentioned, the softball games that we had, usually once a year in spring, I think. The teacher would arrange for us to have a game against Fairview or Jacksonport or Washington. I remember going to Washington School one time. I didn't play, but we were still there. And that was a very, very big outing to go to another school and play ball. Of course, we played hide and seek sometimes. And another game in the winter was Fox and the Goose. And I wish Elvin were here tonight. I don't think he is. Elvin lived near school, and so he would go early in the morning, especially after a fresh snowfall, and he would make a great big pie in the yard and cut it like into 16ths or something. And the thing was, everybody stood on a corner and ran to the middle, and the last one there was it. And it also had traps. I mean, we had trails all over the schoolyard, as I remember, and these traps where you could stand in and be safe, I guess. The person that was it couldn't catch you in there. So, and you had a lot of kids running all over. It was a lot of fun, but I tried to teach some of my friends sitting over there how to play that one day, but I wasn't sure what all the rules were, so I must talk to Elvin about that. And we also had the swing set. I remember one time, one of our students fell off a swing and broke their arm, I think. And Mrs. Anderson got him in her car and took him home, and the rest of us all just stayed at school until she came back. Of course, it wasn't that far to go, because you were within a 2-mile radius about. So, but I remember her doing that. And we had a teeter-totter and I think a slide. One of our our only field trip, I should say, other than going to a baseball game or a softball game, was, I think it was the Cardys that owned the property just south of Groveland School. And there was, it was pretty wooded, and she would get permission from them, and we would spend the day wandering around the woods and picking up fungi and whatever we could find, and that was our big field trip for the year. And in winter, she again got permission from them, and there was a hill, and we would bring sleds from home, and we would slide down the hill there and make a train, you know, one sled behind the other, and which sometimes was also not so good, was dangerous. So I have other things I could talk about, but I will let Bill go on.
Hello. Sometime before, I went to Groveland from 1st to 7th grade, and my 7th grade year would have been 1960, and then when I left, they closed the school. Whatever that means. Well, anyway, but, Bev talked about traveling from, getting back and forth to school. We had a big family and only a few bikes, so I don't know how we picked who was gonna ride the bike and who was gonna have to walk. Well, anyway, one time I must have been on the bike and my sisters were at a walk. Well, anyway, we'd always go through the neighbor's woods, take a shortcut. And he had cows in the woods, right? But there was also a bull in the woods. And my two sisters kind of had a run for their life because the bull was coming after them. So after that, boys being boys, we probably still went through the woods. I don't remember all the details. You're talking a couple years ago. We probably still went through the woods, but the girls, no more shortcuts. Well, anyway, and another experience we had, our parents used to ride share. They take turns. This would be in the winter, although a lot of times in winter you'd have to walk too. But they would ride share. 1 week, one set of parents would do the driving. Usually the men, after, I don't know when they fit the chores in around this because a lot of the women didn't drive then. Well, anyway, to make a long story short, one of the older sons of one of the parents was home from the military. He was in the Army, or I think it was the Army. George was in. Well, anyway, but, and he was a fast driver. So they sent, I'm not going to say his name, but they sent him on the road. And, well, anyway, we had a fast ride to school. Of course, us kids loved it, but after a couple of days of that, somebody must have caught wind of what was going on. So that was the end of our rides with this individual. So then we went back to the boring old rides, right? One other thing I want to talk about a little bit. Oh, Mike wants me to talk about outhouses. Okay, outhouses. Everybody know it? Everybody had experience with outhouses? Well, anyway, the first thought comes to my mind when I think of outhouses, cold. Right? Cold. And like Mike was saying earlier, I think one boy and girl could go at the same time. You put your initials on the blackboard and erase them when you came back. Well, anyway, I got another story about outhouses. This is a story my older brother told me. This was some more neighbor kids whose names I won't reveal, but they were older kids, and they decided, I don't know if this was Halloween or whenever it was, and I think at the time the outhouse was occupied. Anyway, they tipped it over. So, and I think the name I heard, I think, was a school board member was in there. So anyway, after that, whoever did it apparently they didn't have much holding the outhouse down, but then they put concrete around it, and I guess they didn't have any more problems with that. But well, anyway, activities at school and at home. At school, played softball. One of our teachers, we had two teachers, Mrs. Anderson and Mr. Lawazern, two super teachers. And Mr. Lawazern liked softball. And once in a while, we would, and we'd usually play softball. I don't know, what was lunch hour, half an hour? We usually play softball. Well, anyway, we get a good game going on, and once in a while, the game stretched into the afternoon. So, but he was a good teacher. He didn't do that too often. So, anyway, another activity we did, of course, in winter, we did ice skating. We'd go into the neighbor's property. I don't know if you knew about it. And we would all be out there ice skating. And a fun activity at home, besides all the chores, was threshing. Threshing, you'd have, I don't know, everybody knows what that is. You'd have groups get together and thresh the oats, right? And when you were a young boy, you got to drive the tractors from the field with the grain to the buildings where they would thresh it. Well, anyway, young boys, you know what young boys do it, go faster, right? So we'd all be tinkering, putting wires and ropes on the throttles of the tractors to make them go faster. Al, I don't know if you get involved in any of that.
Yeah, we did.
But anyway, so that was a good activity for us anyway. It was hard work for the rest of them. So I don't think I have too much else. So I guess that's about it.
Thank you, Bill.
Yep.
I'll get to you in a little bit. Okay. Next, we're going on to one of the prettiest country schools, Farview School, that dates back to the 1880. Many of the teachers mentioned in the book I later taught with or knew at Sevastopol School. Several teachers in the book mentioned that students had behavior problems when they came to Farview School. And when they started their career at Farview, it was a challenge. And here to represent some of those problems are Evelyn Kohls and Dennis Dietrich. So would you two tell us a few stories from Farview School?
Well, but I don't think I was that bad, but I do remember when I started out at Farview, we did have to walk to school. Or in my case, when we first started, my parents bought me a bicycle that was
Pull it a little closer to
26-inch bicycle, so we had to put some, my dad had to put some paddles on it so I could paddle it up to school. But an interesting thing is, and Evelyn's family lived right up the road from us, and her younger siblings would take the cattle down to Lost Lake for pasture in the fall and the spring. And I can remember times where my sister and I would be on the way to school, and we'd join up with them and help them take the cattle down on their way to school. So it was kind of like a little house on the prairie maybe. But when we got to school, and I think anybody that went to Farview will probably recall what you did with your lunchbox, and that was to you had to go along the side of the steps and go down in the basement, and underneath the steps was a good place to put your lunchbox. And I had the opportunity to go to that school for a wedding many years ago, and that's the first thing I looked at to see if they still had the place to put the lunchbox. But most of the kids that went to Farview when I went there all were south of the school towards West Jacksonport, and there were a lot of them. And I can remember that I was a little bit disappointed when after a few years, we had school bus. And we only lived 1.5 miles from the school, so we were the last ones picked up, and we didn't have very long to ride on the school bus. And I thought we were getting kind of gypped, but by the time I was a senior in high school, riding the school bus to the last day before we graduated, I think I rode enough school bus. But some of the things I recall that were actually kind of fun was when you got to be older grades, you got to go cut a Christmas tree. And Irv went, was always generous and left, I believe the kids always cut a Christmas tree out of his woods. And so we took off right before Christmas and getting ready for the stage being built. And we took our time going down through the woods, and it wasn't that easy finding a nice tree. So we kind of farmed that out all day, and we didn't get one by noontime, but she sent us back after dinner to go and get one. And you know, it's not that easy finding a Christmas tree that's all perfect down on the ground, so we had to crawl up about 20 feet and cut one off. And we made it back in time before school ended, and the teacher says, well, what did you do with the rest of it? Well, we just left it. So she was the type that didn't think it was good to have a tree without a top in the woods, so the next day we got to go back and cut it all down. But, you know, I think the teachers, they had their hands full with all those different classes, and so some kids were still having class while others were outside in recess. And I can remember one day being all excited. You were allowed to come in if it was really important to interrupt the class and ask the teacher something, and I came running in because she said, yes, Dennis, what's wrong? And I said, well, you know, there's a gopher out in the playground, and I'd like permission to drown it out. And she said, well, okay. I didn't tell her. I grabbed a bat along with the pail of water, and when I came back with the gopher, she made me sit inside for a couple of recesses. She said, I didn't tell you that you could kill the gopher. So it was a lot of fun, and then things changed when I was in school because, like I say, we had a school bus that started. We had lunch programs for hot lunch every day, and we even started to get the physical education teacher came out, and my cousin and I, we played instruments, and it was just us two at Farview, and the teacher came from Sevastopol and gave us lessons in the basement to learn how to play our particular instruments. So,
Did you have Jerome Visti for a teacher at all?
I had him in my first grade, and then he went into the service halfway through.
And he mentions in here that you kids used to call him Mr. Crabapple.
Yeah, probably rightly so. He always asked, caught me running up the steps one time. He said, do you run up the steps at home? And I said, yeah. He said, well, don't do it here. But, you know, along with that, I would have to say one of the things I remember as growing up, and I'm sure it's the same for a lot of people here, is back in those days we had a lot of birthday parties, and seems like there was one a week throughout the whole year that everybody got together. As kids played hard, and the parents played cards. In the wintertime, when we got tired, we lay down in the bed if there was room for all the coats that were on the bed, and it was a good time where everybody was together. So that's one thing that I remember well.
Thank you, Dennis. Evelyn, where are you going to take us?
Well, I'm jealous because I never knew there was a school bus that went past the school.
Evie, you can take your mask off while you're talking.
Of course, I started school in 1944. So, let's see, yeah, that gives us 1952, I think, and that's when I started high school. So, we walked a lot, but at that time, my father was a farmer and a carpenter, and my uncle, who lived a little bit, it was between Dennis and I, was my uncle, and he had horses yet. So in the wintertime, he would bring us with a sleigh if it was really bad. But most time we walked, and of course we had the snow pants, and somebody mentioned slacks under their skirts. Well, we had really thick, brown, long stockings.
Oh, yes.
Oh, yeah, we had those for a long time, yeah. And when he mentioned the school, I don't know about the other schools, but I know Farview had a basement, so we had quite a few steps going up to the first floor, right? I mean, the main floor. Yeah, and so there was quite a few steps up, which he could run, of course, he did. And then we had some down, and that was a nice basement. And somebody else mentioned the grate. We had one, too, in our school. And I don't remember a bubbler, but my sister, who was a year younger, said we did have a bubbler, but I don't remember that. But I do remember that somebody always had to go out every day and pump the pail of water and bring it in. In the wintertime, you set it on the register, the big register in the front, and get it warm so we would have water to wash our hands. And we did have a merry-go-round. Did the other schools have merry-go-rounds?
I think so. Didn't we?
Swing set.
Did we have one of those things that you jump
I don't know if we had a swing
Well,
set
we
or
had a
slide.
merry-go-round. I don't remember teeter-totters or swings, but we had a merry-go-round.
basketball?
And a ball diamond, and I don't remember going to schools to play softball. So I don't know when that happened either. But Mary Ellen Bly sent me some things, and she said they did go and play softball with other schools, but I don't remember that at all. And we did the same thing. We always, our seats were attached, and we had little chairs for the little kids and bigger chairs for the bigger kids. And I remember, because I liked it, is that we're blackboards all over, but on the top, I don't know what kind of material it was, but there's where we could paste all our pictures of everything we did, where our penmanship or our coloring or whatever it was. I can remember that above the blackboards, and I don't know why I remember that, because I don't remember too much. And I know we at school, we did have, is anybody here from Farview? Because I know we had what are called box socials. And I know, why did we have box socials other than to put, I know we were really excited. We decorated these shoe boxes or whatever and put food in them, and then they auctioned them off or something, but I don't know why we did it. Does anybody know?
To buy that merry-go-round.
Yeah, I don't know. I shouldn't tell you this because it really grosses me out every time I think of it, but our merry-go-round was made of metal. And do you know what happens when you put your tongue in the wintertime against something that's metal? Well, you only do it once. It hurts. It sticks really hard. We all tried it, I think. And we had Valentine's Day parties we were always excited about. That was special. We had Christmas parties. We had that box social. I don't remember Halloween, but we must have had it because back in my mind, I think we did Bob for Apples. And we all had chores. I mean, we had this stuff that you pull on the floor, compound or something red, and you had a push broom, and you had to sweep the floors with that. And of course, you had to clean the erasers.
I remember that now.
Oh, we had lots of chores, and if for the furnace, if there was a man, he was in charge of getting the furnace started, and warm for us in the morning. But if it was a woman, then somebody, one of the parents that lived close to the school would come and do it. They didn't have to do it. Let's see. And of course, I don't think anybody was that naughty at Farview, but I can think of a few, but I won't mention any names. But one of the things that you do know is, and I think you've read this probably in every fiction book you ever read or whatever, if you had pigtails and there was a boy in the back sitting behind you, you were guaranteed to get your hair pulled. I don't know what it was about pigtails, but it was just had to be something. Let's see, we had to put up the flag every morning. Let's see.
Now, you have an 8th grade graduation picture.
Oh,
Evelyn.
yeah. When we graduated from 8th grade, we didn't have a school graduation. We had a county graduation. This is all the schools. I don't know all the one-room schools in the county. And we had a superintendent, and his name was Curtis Chauson or something. Johnson. And this is what our diploma looked like. It told you that you graduated from 8th grade. Yeah, and I'm on there, and I even found myself. I was very proud of it, but all I have to do is look for the very shortest person there is, and it's me.
And all the 8th graders from the county came and got their picture taken together on the steps of St. Joe's Church.
It was St. Joe's. I didn't know. I know it was one of the Catholic churches, but I didn't know which one. This is St. Joe's. Okay, so I don't know how long they did that, but let's see, I was done in 8th grade in 1952, and I remember bookmobile, but I don't remember any buses or anything like that. Let's see, is there anything else I wanted to talk about? Or lunch pails. Like they said, they were, I really, really wanted one of these really pretty little square ones, about this high and about this square. And it had a thermos bottle inside of it. Well, at one time, there was 5 of us in school at one time, maybe only 4. But there was no way, and we were all going to get our own lunchbox. So we had the kind like the workman had, with the big round ones, with the thermos fitting on top. Nothing pretty about them at all, but we really, really would have liked one of those other ones. I can remember that. And let's see. Of course, bringing a school bell, that was really something special that you could do. Our school really was pretty. Now, it's on County T, it's just a little ways north of West Jacksonport, and of course now it was white, and then whoever bought it painted it red, but now the paint is peeling. But it still kind of looks just about like the school does. Yeah, and we just had fun, and I can't remember much about what we learned either. I know we had to do a lot of penmanship. I don't know why, but and we had music, but I don't remember being on the radio. I had some kind of music, but I don't think it was ever on the radio. We just had music, and we had Christmas programs, and we had Valentine's activities, and let's see.
Evelyn, Ken Smith brought in this picture of Harview,
Yeah,
and it's white.
It's white, but it's red. When it was sold afterwards, when it was sold, somebody bought it and they painted it red, but now the red paint is peeling off.
Okay. But it was white when you remember it.
Oh, yeah. And I don't know, I think my youngest sister and brother, there were 7 of us. I think the sister was maybe in 4th grade and the brother was in 2nd grade. I was already long gone by that time, and they went to Carlsville then because they shut the schools down and they put them in Carlsville. And I can remember, this has nothing to do with our little schools, but my brother was kind of stubborn, and for the longest time, he was very angry that he had to go to this bigger school because he wanted to go to the same school that his other brothers and sisters had always gone to, and he refused to cooperate. I'm not quite sure how long he did not cooperate, but I know it was a struggle for a long time with the teacher and with my parents. He refused to do anything. But he turned out to be really quite a smart kid, but boy, he sure didn't like to change. Let's see it. And I think we did the same kind of things everybody else did, basically, you know.
So it's a very good report, Evelyn. Thank you. The oldest school district in Jacksonport was District Number 1, which we all know as the red brick schoolhouse on top of the hill in Jacksonport. Early teachers sometimes rode stagecoaches to get to school. As a student of the 1950s living on County Tronquay, my siblings and I walked the Zatlin School Road to get to school many times. Here to relive a few moments in history are Mary LeClair Kaye and Bob Bieri. So take us away.
Well, I went to Jacksonport 1 through 6th grade. The 7th and 8th graders at that time were moved to Sevastopol. I was born in 1948, late in the fall, late in November. And there's some of the things that started to change as I was a little kid. We got our first TV around 1952. And there was only one channel, so there wasn't a whole lot to watch. A few years later, telephones became popular. We got our first telephone. And the funny thing about that was we had a party line where there'd be 4 or 5 families on this one party line, and you had a certain ring. Say, for instance, our ring would be 1 long and 2 shorts. If you heard that, you'd go answer the phone. But if you heard anything else, you were not supposed to eavesdrop. But I think the ladies really liked the eavesdrop on the telephone. Back in, I think it was 1952, I was just 4.5 years old. I remember we got a new car. It was a purple Hudson. It was kind of funny because I remember riding home in the back seat holding on to there was a strap in the back of the car. So, but that's one of the very first things I can remember because I was only 4 years old. I don't remember what teacher we had when I was in the 1st or 2nd grade, but later on, we had a teacher by the name of Doug Visti. He was a young guy, liked sports. He was born and raised in Bailey's Harbor, and his dad was a icon at the Bailey's Harbor School. He taught for years there, I believe. Well, anyway, Doug was a pretty good teacher. At least the young boy really liked him because he liked sports. He'd bring his golf clubs, and he'd hit balls way out in the field, and us little kids would run after him. And never had so much fun before. Later on, a year or two later, a couple of years later, when the Milwaukee Braves were in the World Series, Doug brought a TV to school. And he set it up with a set of rabbit ears, and we watched the World Series on the TV. Now, I don't think that was kosher with the rest of the school system, guys watching baseball games during school hours, but anyway, that was Mr. Visti. He was quite the guy. As far as going to school, the first few years we didn't have a bus, or we had to walk just like everybody else. I can't remember really walking in the morning so much. I think our parents must have took us to school in the morning, but at night, if it was good going or nice weather, we had to walk down the highway. We couldn't cut across Albert Wagner's farm because, like somebody said before, there was a bull in with the cows, so we had to walk out, stay on the highway. So that was my walk. If you're lucky, you'd find a beer can. They were made of steel back then, and you'd stamp that on your foot where it would curl up on the side of your feet, and you could go clink, 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 and then you'd have your older sister holler at you for being such a jerk with the beer can. Gotta think a minute there. I'm getting old.
Bob, you mentioned this big mural that you worked on when you were a kid in school. And that mural is still hanging in Dan's studio. So what do you remember about that, Bob?
Well, that was a big school project, and all the grades worked on it, and it went the full length of the classroom. It was pinned up on the wall, and it was a mural of the town of Jacksonport back in the 1800s. Like I said, I don't know exactly what they were celebrating, if it was 100 years, might have been, but it was quite the mural. We're very proud of it.
And you can still view that today at Dan's place, and it did win some award too at the county fair or something like that.
After a few years, we started riding a school bus, and our first driver was George Steger. Now there was maybe some of you know the Steger family, but George was the old grandpa. But one thing with George, you had to watch out. He chewed tobacco. And when he grabbed that lever to open the door, the first thing that he did is spit out. So if you were in the way, you got a little tobacco juice on you. But other than that, he was a good old driver, good old guy. Being out in the country, there are people, well, we had to walk, like I said, but I remember Gary Bly would bring his horse to school. Every now and then, he didn't bring it all the time, but he'd come up the back road there behind the school, or it was not a really road, it was a right-of-way, I guess. And the people from like Marshalls and the people that lived north of school, they walked up that right-of-way and come to school. I'll think of some more later.
Well, there'll be chance for more comments. Now we'll go to the kid.
Well, I grew up in Jacksonport, and we went in school. I went to Jacksonport for 3 grades, first, second, and third, and then we went to Sevastopol. But the years that I went there was 1960 to 63. And the kids in my grade, I see some of them here tonight. You see, they were Jim Halstead, Randy Halstead, Tom Wilson, Cindy Lassay, Vicki Schneider, Leon Ostrand, and Art Miller. And we were, as third graders, we got to sit by the big windows, and these windows were big. They were huge. But it was cold sitting there, too, so there was a downside.
Hold the microphone closer.
Sorry. There was a downside to sitting to the big windows. Our teacher was Mrs. Gladys Anderson, and we had her all 3 years. I remember the same thing basically as some of the other guests have said about going up to the front of the class in a small, they had small chairs up there, they were in a semicircle, and you had your assigned chair that you would go to and sit, and the teacher would teach you, and the rest of the kids in the class would just be quiet and do their studies while we had class. The free milk that they had, the aluminum holders, where you could punch it into the cylinders and then fill up with the milk. Our our first, second, and third grades were divided into rows. And third, like I said, was sitting by the windows. Second was in the middle, and first was the little kids were over towards the warm side of the room. In the front of the class was the alphabet, capital letter, then the small letter next to it. Mr. Gail Wonky was our Phi Ed teacher, and he would come from Sevastopol, I think once a week or maybe once every 2 weeks, and he would teach us, I don't know, how to kick a ball or throw a ball or some organized activity. But when it was too cold outside, we would go downstairs. At the time that I went to Jacksonport, the older kids had already left and had gone to other schools. So I believe the 2 years after I left is when they closed Jacksonport. So they were already starting to do away with the older kids there. Some of the things that we did as chores and fun times were my family. We lived on the north side of town. We had cottages, so in the summer we were cleaning cottages. And we had the job, since my family had lots of girls, of ironing the sheets, and we used a big mangle. And I'd love to try doing it now to see if I could still do it. What's that?
Just once.
Just once, yes. I don't want to, no, yeah. And in the wintertime, my family made caviar. And we would, my dad would go pick up the guts from the fish up north. I think it was from Hickey Brothers that he may have done that, and bring them home. And my dad was such a hard worker. He worked at PBI in the daytime, and then at night he would work on the caviar making. But all of us kids were involved in that. We had to go out and help, and it sounds kind of gross, but it was really kind of interesting. You just would rub the guts with rubber gloves through a screen, and all the eggs would fall through. And then my dad would take them and wash them several times, and then he would salt them, and then he would hang them to drain overnight. And the next day, my mom, after we went to school and after the little ones were put down for a nap, she would go out and finish the job, and there were sometimes little black specks in there that were from, from the washing, and she would pick those out and then put them in a 10 or 15 gallon container, and they'd get shipped to Port Washington. And in Port Washington is where they dyed them the black color. They were orange when they left us, but it was interesting. Some of the things that I remember doing when I was little, behind Bly's store, there was, you could go and ride a pony. And it was only 15 or 25 cents. But it was a pony corral, and it went the whole distance around the property that is behind the store. And there were, I think, 3 or 4 horses that you could choose from. Well, my horse was Trigger. And Trigger could go fast. And it was fun just to see how fast you could go around the circle. But you had to be careful when you turned on the corner. You had to lean just right, otherwise your knee would hit the post on the corner, and it would slow you down real quick. Yeah, but it was fun. It was really a fun time. We rode bikes a lot. We would play tag ball at night next to my parents, my uncle, and my grandmother lived all in one string. And so we had 3 houses that we could hide while we played tag ball, and it was always a lot of fun. Things I remember doing that were fun, my dad used to play baseball, and I would go with him on Sundays and cheer him on. And we had a Buick, and I can still remember the smell of the old Buick. You know, you get in it and those smells sometimes. I remember that smell. No seatbelts, no nothing. You just got in and went. And yeah, I think that's my, oh, yes. Regarding school again, at recess in the wintertime, the fun thing to do, which they didn't want you to do, was go on the side of the school next to where Joe Gagnon lives now.
The Schmidt Hill.
Schmidt Hill, and slide down the hill, and you could do that wearing your snow pants or whatever, but they didn't like you doing that. They didn't want you to do that. But once you got past the trees, you were safe because they couldn't see you. So you could go down, well, I wore my snow pants but had my skirt on, and my skirt got all wet. Well, when I took my snow pants off, Mrs. Anderson saw that my skirt was wet, and she had me just wear my slacks, and she pinned my wet skirt up on the front of where the alphabet was, way high, so that it would dry. And I was so embarrassed, I could hardly look up from my schoolwork. I'm done.
Thank you, Mary. That's some neat memories. Just a show of hands from the audience. How many of you attended Washington School? Okay. How about Groveland School? Farview? And Jacksonport District 1. Okay. Tonight we have some of the owners of the buildings that presently live there now. I just met Anari Collins. Give us a wave. It's neat to see kids' toys outside that building now. And Anari has brought some pictures of what it looks like inside and some of the remodeling that's been done there. So if you went to Washington School, check with her after the program. There's some neat pictures. And we have Carrie Anderson.
Yeah, right
Okay.
In the back.
there. Well, there she is.
She brought in a 1907 picture of the students from Groveland School and a poker that probably Bill, you stoked the fire and used that poker in Groveland. Farview School, are the owners of Farview School here tonight? It really looks nice. And District Number 1, we've got Dan Meanier here who you can go, that's one school you can go into. He holds public concerts and likes visitors to tell them stories about it, and he'll take you down to the old furnace room, maybe. We'd like to hear some of the stories of some of you people that went to these schools, and we'd like you to share those memories if you don't mind. If you would, please stand or wave your hand so we know where you are, and somebody will bring a microphone close to you. And state your first and last name, and look toward Laddie, and tell which school you attended and what years. I know we've got a couple people that want to talk for sure, so I'm taking the microphone over to Mary right now.
Well, pardon? Oh, I have to look there?
Yes. First and last name.
My name is Mary Stanky, and I went to Groveland School in the years 1953 to 54.
But your name then was Mary Lou?
Place. And my brother Tommy, he was about 2 years older than I was, and I lived with Grandpa and Grandma Lagerquist and their daughter Janie. Janie, Tommy, and I went to Groveland together. And I was in first grade, and I did not want to go to school. All of a sudden, I was transported from the pasture and the cows on the farm to school. First grade, we had to sit in the first row. Second grade sat in the second row. We were the first ones in the morning to get our lessons. I wasn't a very good student. I wasn't a very good reader. I was afraid of Mrs. Anderson. Oh, boy. And one day, Grandma gave Janie and I each a permanent. Well, mine didn't take except for the one little curl in the middle of my forehead. The next day in the morning, Mrs. Anderson had us go to the back where there was a table and little chairs for the first graders and had me read, which I couldn't do very well. So as punishment, she pulled the curl in the middle of my forehead, and I had no more curl. So I also remember in first grade, the night before I found my favorite baby rattle, light pink and blue blocks. Brought them to school, put them in my left desk drawer. So I got bored very easily, and I decided to take out my rattle. Very quietly, but she heard it. So she asked where the noise was coming from, who was making the noise. I had to raise my hand. And she made me go up with the rattle in front of the whole class. And I was mortified, but I lived. So I gave it to her.
This was all during first grade?
Oh, yeah. And then, well, I was the youngest of the class. I was 5, then 6. And then I remember wanting to go to the outhouse just so I could get out of class, because I liked moving around, and I didn't like learning, not in school. So I'd go to the outhouse, and I'd stay outside and play. Well, I wasn't the only one who thought that. And one day, a lot of us were outside, and Mrs. Anderson came out and caught us playing and goofing around. And she shagged us all back in, and she gave the whole school a lecture. And from then on, only one person could go to the outhouse at a time, and we had to write or print our names on the blackboard. End of my fun. We did play, I think it's Andy, Andy over. I couldn't figure out if it was Andy, Andy or Auntie, Auntie. And Red Rover, Red Rover. Well, one time, and then the bigger boys would throw the ball over the school roof, and the other bigger boys, or whoever, would stand on the other side and catch the ball. And one time the ball went down the chimney. We had a great big black stove in the school, and when Carrie Anderson invited my cousin Jimmy Wagner and I back to our old school, that big black monstrosity was gone. And Carrie took us downstairs in the basement. I never knew there was a basement. There's a beautiful basement there. Tall ceiling. Anyway, it just astounded me what I missed when I was young. And I also missed the fact there was a beautiful tin roof on the ceiling. Well, what did kids who are 5 know about the tin ceiling? It's gorgeous, and it's still there.
She did a beautiful job on that school.
Oh, and she put beams from, I think, Minnesota in there. Oh, it's gorgeous. So I really appreciated her showing me her home. Let's see. Oh, geez, we walked home a lot. I loved walking. Not I. Oh, no. Somebody scared me not to walk east through the swamp. I walked on Burger Road. Oh, we had Georgie Ponsluff and Patsy Ponsluff in our school. We had other kids that I was related to, other kids I remember. Well, poor Georgie Ponsluff, he had a name that everybody made fun of. On our way home from school, I remember the kids, I don't think I did, but maybe, and the Cummings, David Lagerquist, Johnny Lagerquist, I don't know which of us, but we said, Georgie, Porgy, Pumpkin Pie, kissed the girls and made them cry. When the girls came out to play, Georgie, Porgy ran away. Oh, gosh, that poor guy. And then one time, there was a snake on Burger Road. And all the kids decided to kind of play with it, and they were putting stones on it. I'm like, oh, I didn't like snakes, so I walked ahead. got almost to Agric Heights, Grandpa's and Grandma's farm, and Grandpa came home from work early, told me to get in the car, and made me ride with him all the way back to where those lollygaggers were. I was so mad because I just wanted to go play with the cows. Anyway, let's see, what else do I have? One of the Schleicher girls would walk around school like this. She'd just have her hands like this, and I thought she was so cool. It was either Joyce or Kathy. And let's see, I talked about walking home with the Cummings and the Lagerquist and the Ponsleffs.
While she's getting,
And I wasn't afraid of Mrs. Anderson anymore because I picked cherries at her and Torger Anderson's cherry orchard in 1964. And she and Grandma, being school teachers, got together. She invited Grandma into her kitchen, and I too. And I just almost died and went to heaven. I said, oh my gosh, she's so nice.
and it was a beautiful house, too.
I don't remember that.
Okay.
I just remember sitting at the table thinking, I'm not scared of her anymore.
Well, you know that the teachers earned their money. This is all a first grader here. Thank you, Mary.
But there's more, but I'm not going to say anymore. I just wish I had a great time at Groveland School, but I did not.
The next one,
When I left, I was sorry.
Carrie, you wanted to say something? Carrie Anderson, present owner of Groveland School.
And my very shy husband, who is also the owner of Groveland School, who has worked his buns off. I seem to get a lot of credit, but he's the muscle man. We bought the schoolhouse in '83, and I just we were so lucky to find it when we did. It was the cheapest place we could afford. We had a brand new baby, and we moved right in, and we had 2 outhouses there, no indoor plumbing and no electricity. That schoolhouse that we're in was built, okay, if you don't know where I'm talking about, it's the corner of Junction Road and County A. So that's the Groveland School. And that's the second building that was built on that location. The first building, 1881, burnt down. There's a photo up front of 1910 that I have that you should look at of the Groveland School, and it's all clear cut around there. And if you see it now, there's trees everywhere, but that was probably back in the day when they clear cut Wisconsin. Some of the names that I know who went there: Viola Tank, the Sherrigs, the Stenzels, the Apples, the Kiehnau's, the Schleichers, the Flocks. And there's a lot of lilac patches all around our area that used to be homesteads, that there's really not much of a trace left except those lilac trees, because they put lilac trees by the outhouse. That was their little secret. I heard a story about Ben Lagerquist, who, to walk to school for him, the shortcut was not Berger Road, the shortcut was to go through the cow pasture. And there again, there was a bull in the pasture, and he had a red jacket on. And he used to have to dodge the bull, and he had a few close calls. This is a real cool story about our house. Emma Toft, the pioneer woman from Bailey's Harbor, most of us know Toft's Point. Her first teaching job for 1 year was at Groveland Schoolhouse. Early on in those days, you had to be a single woman. You could not be married. You lived with a farm family. And I'm not sure what the arrangements were there, but different families hosted the teachers. To the north of the Groveland School was a huge cattle farm, one of the biggest ones in the day. The Lagerquist farm was becoming one of the big potato farms. And kitty corner from our schoolhouse was a shingle mill factory. Our schoolhouse was built out of tamarack wood. It had a coal furnace like what you were talking about. It was shaped like 2 donuts. And when we took it out of there, it took about 5 guys to help us muscle it up the steps. And we called Orrin Simon to come and get it for scrap metal. He gave us $7 and took a sledgehammer after it. So that was, but there's a coal bin in the corner, and somebody hold up that poker up there. That was the coal bin poker. It's by you, Billy Schleicher. That was one of them. There was a whole bunch of pokers down there. 2 outhouses, a hopscotch on the floor in the basement, a big stand-up basement, a manual arts workbench in the basement for the boys to learn how to hammer and drill and saw and measure, and all the posts down in the basement are whittled on and chewed up like little kids were sharpening all their stuff on there. I know of Ted Hepner. I know some of his relatives, and here's an interesting story about Ted Hepner. He got free rent at the Lagerquist farm because he taught their kids how to play piano. At one time, there were 43 students in this K-8 one-room school. When they built it, as they did with most of the schools that I know of, they used south exposure for the windows, which, you know, that's just natural heat in the winter. Ours had a huge basement. There was pretty easy digging there. Full attic and a pressed tin ceiling, which we still have. A common lunch for them was baked potatoes. The school grates were used to dry off winter clothes, and the clothes were always full of wet mittens and wet everything. We had a 100-year celebration there in 2007, and the Historical Society sponsored it, and we had a box lunch social. And so somebody said, box lunch social, what is that? Well, I don't really know, but I think it was something like this. I think the women made their best lunch they could possibly make, and then it was, all the lunches were put out, and that's how you got a date. Or maybe the men bid on a lunch, or that was kind of the social thing to get the lunch that Sally made because her lemon pie was in there. So that goes way back. So that was a tradition. And when we gutted the place out, which it had to be gutted out, it had no electric, and we had to. It had a double layer lath and plaster, not just one layer of lath and plaster, but a double layer. One this way and one that way. And he knocked it all out, and it was plaster with horsehair in it. So they really built it. It was pretty windproof. And then just one more thing. Mr. Madden was my kid's 4th grade teacher, and you by far were their favorite teacher in their whole life. That's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you, Carrie. How many of you remember taking goiter pills? Okay. For those that don't know, we were in an area that did not have a source of iodine, and people often would get a huge growth, usually on their neck, called a goiter, And once they started iodizing salt, the problem pretty much went away. But I've got one of my classmates here that went to Washington School. I want him to tell the story of goiter pills. Bob Kurtz.
Hello? Hello, okay. My name is Robbie Kurtz. I live in County Trunk-T. I went to the Washington School for the first 2 years, 55, 56, 56, 57. Benny was in school with me there, and it was a great time. We only had 28 students, so we couldn't get any more than that into school. That's as big as it go. And we had, Benny's family had quite a few, 4 or 5 kids going to school, and the Howard family at one time, they had 17 children, so they had 6, 7, 8 of them going to school. So that was pretty much, over half of our student body already. So, and so I rode on the milk truck to school when I was 5 years old. We started at 5. But I always saw Benny go by, but I jumped on the milk truck, so I didn't have to go all the way over there. But anyways, getting into the goiter pills. In 56, 57, we went to Sevastopol. We were the first school, Washington, to be going to that school, to be involved in losing our small schools, so we felt pretty sad about it. So that summer when we came back, Kenny Ehlers, who lived right by the school, we decided to see what was going on inside our old school. Of course, the windows were up too high, and we were only about this high, so we had to figure out how to get into the school, so we went into school through the cold chute, which was about a 6 or 7 foot drop to the floor, and when we got down there, we didn't really know how we were going to get out of there, but we didn't worry about that at that point. We did get upstairs, and we were snooping around looking at the papers that were still there. Quite a few desks were being stored in the school at that time. So we were going through some of the desks that were there before and some of the new ones that were brought in. But the teacher's desk was still there. So we started going through that to see if there was any notes in there that would involve us, which we found a few that we didn't really want to involve our parents with. But we did find the goiter pills. And there was over half, they come in a jar or a plastic, whatever. We liked the flavor of chocolate, of course, so we started eating goiter pills. And we ate goiter pills for quite a while. We decided there was no sense in leaving these goiter pills go to waste. So we pretty much ate the whole jar of goiter pills. And about halfway through the next day, I asked to come over to visit with Kenny. He wasn't feeling very well. I wasn't feeling all that well, so it took us about 2 or 3 days to get over that, but I'm sure we didn't have any physical problems other than that for quite a while. That was pretty much the story of the goiter pills, but it was a great school. It was a great time to be involved with the community, and we did the same thing. We always had plays that Diane had mentioned. I'll bring this up and I'll cut it short. The boys would make a stage, and to make the stage, they would run a smooth wire from one end to the other of the school, because rooms weren't very wide. All the schools were built fairly narrow with long rows. And they put them across there. In our first grade class, there were 4 boys. We were some dandies. Felt sorry for a teacher. We had 2 teachers that year. Nancy Stoll, which was a tyke, before she got married to Wisa and moved away. So she was living, I think, with one of Benny's aunts and uncles just down the road there that year. So she was an angel, and she took care of us. She was really sweet. But they had the wires on there, and we dressed up in full white long underwear jobs. I don't know, it's not just the short underwear, I don't know what they call them, but from top to bottom, we had long underwear. And they used crepe paper and wrapped around us as candy canes. And we were supposed to go out on the stage and sing We 4 Candy Canes song or something or other, and we were walking out there, and we marched out there, and the 4th one coming in, Lee Hartwig, I think it was Lee at that time, caught his crepe paper on the wire, and all the way out there, he unraveled till he got to the point where it was down about his knee, and then he realized that he was basically naked just with long underwear on. So we couldn't stop laughing, and Lee was trying to cover himself up all the while we were trying to sing the song. But we got through it. But there were great parties, there were great times in those schools, and you know, it's something that if you didn't go to one, you really don't realize what community was really about.
Thank you, Bob. Is there anybody else over here that would like to share a story? Chad. I think your dad was on the school board.
He was. Question to ask somebody. Does anybody remember getting a polio shot in the bookmobile?
I got mine in the rear end.
I got mine in the arm. And the bookmobile, that's what I remember. I got a shot.
The bookmobile was the center of our.
Well, it's Bill Hebel, and our family name up here is Bagnall, so I'm half a Bagnall. But my grandmother taught school, and it had to be in the early 1900s, and I often wonder which school she taught at. Yeah, no, this Bertha was my grandmother, and they lived obviously on Bagnall Road, but I'm guessing the closest school would have been right over here, but I don't know.
Let me get you the book. Teachers are listed in the back. And it's available for Phyllis later.
I spent all my summers here, but winters I went back to Stevens Point where I was from. But anyhow.
Thank you. Anybody over here have a story for us? Oh, we'd love to hear.
Marlene Larson was a miller, and I lived right down the hill from the school. Oh, sure. I lived down at the bottom of the hill. And one of the things that I didn't like is I could never take lunch to school. Because we were right down below the hill, we always had to go home for lunch. And so we would run down that hill, go and have lunch, and go back to school. And that also meant that we could never have bought bread from the store because my mother always had bread baked at home, and we had that at home.
Right.
So, and I attended Jacksonport grade school, all 8 grades, and I was there the first year that Emily Trainer was the teacher. And she was my teacher for all 8 grades, and I think she left the year that I left. But she was a great teacher, and she became Emily Hickey up in Bailey's Harbor afterwards. She was real neat. There was one other thing I was going to mention. I guess I'm too old at going right straight out. Yes, my dad taught, and he's in the book. He taught at Farview. He retired from Sevastopol, and he also taught at, taught at Brussels, but he retired as superintendent of the grade school at Sevastopol. We went, our fun activities in Jacksonport was there was a skating rink down here at the town hall. And all of us kids, we all had a walk, but we always came down here skating. Everybody got together. There was a couple of other activities. Sorry, I can't remember them. I'll remember later.
Marlene, I think your dad painted this checkerboard. I got his classroom at Sevastopol after he stopped being a teacher there. And many teachers made their own things for the school, and your dad was very talented in many ways.
He made one with all wood inlaid, and I have that at home.
Thank you. Anybody else have a story to tell us?
I'm Lee Bly. I attended Farview School, and I was the last graduating class. Gloria Biddorf, Bob Bungo, Dale Graff, Hank Gilson, and Herb Miller. And that's when they changed it over. The next grade went to up to Sevastopol, which was Carol and Marilyn Kiehnau. So that's when the school was closed. Not closed, but I was the last graduating class, and going down to St. Joe's to have our picture taken or our test or whatever.
Thank you, Lee. And Mary Lou, that game was ante-over. Ante-over. I remember playing it at my Uncle Elmer and Aunt Ellie's house, and Pat threw the potato through a window. My brother Pat's window. Or maybe it was me, I don't remember. Okay.
Well, I'm not from Jacksonport, but I did go to one roof school, and I rode my horse to school. And we had, this was back quite a while for most of you have Howard Williamson. My wife is writing the story up to be in the Pulse, so you'll maybe hear somebody. But one story that I do want to tell is the fact that the government was so good to us when they started the lunch program. They gave us boxes and boxes and boxes and boxes of dried prunes. And you got to be very good at spitting the prunes. So that was an activity I didn't see here in Jacksonport. So you ought to, I grew up in the central part of the state of Missouri. So this is all the same. I hear these things, you know them very well, but it's great to come up here and hear this history of what you all are getting really unbelievable.
Thank you, Lauren. Matt, have any of you thought of a story you wanted to tell yet? Bob, you said you'd think of one later. You got a mic.
I don't know exactly what year when ballpoint pens come into being, but we didn't have any at our school. We had everybody had what they call a fountain pen. In our desk there was a hole. There was a hole in the desk where you put your ink bottle, or called it an inkwell. You take the cover off of that. The girls with the long ponytails that sat in front of you better be careful.
Thank you, Bob.
So apparently, my name is Bill Shudwar. Howard got to speak, so this is an integrated program, so I'm going to speak too. I'm from Southern Door. And that's where boys are men. And so I went to Fairland School. It's a two-room school. You know where that is? That's in the little village of Nemours. And Fontaine's store was across the road, across County N. And if we got to school early and you had a few pennies in your pocket, you'd go there and buy some penny candy before school. That was against the law to go there during the school day, but if you got there before or after school, you'd go buy penny candy. So I was in line, and the little boy in front of me bought some penny candy, and he had his money in a napkin, in a cloth napkin, and he threw the napkin at the clerk, Mrs. Fontaine, and ran out the door. So then I was next in line, so I paid and took my candy to school. And about in the middle of the morning, Mrs. Fontaine showed up with the little boy's napkin, and in that napkin was a $100 bill. But it was Monopoly money.
You had an audience there for a minute there.
I'm Patty Williamson, and just by chance, I spent the afternoon with Carl and Ruth Schultz, interviewing Carl for a story that will be in the Pulse. Sometime when I get all his stories recorded, the editor at the Pulse called me and said she was tired of printing obituaries and reading them and saying what an interesting life that person had, how much they contributed to the community. We should be writing these stories while they're still alive. So I had the privilege of talking to Carl and Ruth, and the conversation's going to be continued for a long time because they have a lot of stories. As you know, he's been at Anna's place since February, but he's just as sharp as can be, and it was a privilege to talk with both of them. And I enjoyed this. My mother taught in a one-room school. I never went to one, but when I was a preschooler, I go to parties there. And that would have been over 80 years ago, and I remember the Halloween party where Grandma somebody lost her false teeth in the tub bobbing for apples. That was a memorable day.
One of my first memories at Jacksonport School involved Carl Scholes. He started at Sevastopol in 1954, and in the early 50s, Bob, I remember, or the 50s, he came with a suit on and a bus and picked up all of us from Jacksonport School, and we planted these pine trees that are behind this building on Arbor Day.
Do you know what convinced Lucy should marry him after just a few months of dating? He came to pick her up to go to Peninsula Players, and he brought her a corsage he had made himself of carrots. And she thought, that man has a great sense of humor. Not every woman would have appreciated that.
No. Any more stories?
Hi, Tom Wilson. I was a classmate of Mary's at Jacksonport, and I thought maybe she'd tell the story, but probably one of the most exciting things for me the first 3 years, we were hit by lightning. I don't know if you remember that. And Vicky's here, and the electricity jumped out of the lunches were burnt, and more important than that, my only good artwork ever. So it thwarted my artistic career, but that was probably okay. But I'll never forget Mrs. Anderson grabbing a glass of water and running to the back and throwing it out. I don't know how it got put out, if there were, but we were on fire. It was on, and you know, maybe you weren't there, but we were on fire. Maybe you were doing something else, Mary. I'm not sure.
At Jacksonport School, before you came to school, a year before, sometimes you would be invited to see what school was like. And I remember that I was in the basement, Pat and I were both down there in classes, and my twin younger brothers, Sean and Steve, were invited to school. And they set up a card table in front, and those two twins and Joey and Joanne LeClair sat at the card table, and I don't know what Sean did to Steve, but Steve crawled under the table and bit Sean's ankle, and the card table went flying, and their career at school didn't change much after that. So, last chance for stories here. Panel, have any others? Good. Well, thank you very much, and as Laddie mentioned, this will be available for you to view on the, what did you say again, Laddie?
Well, we'll play it on channel 986 for Charter, channel 986 if you have Charter TV. There's a schedule on the same website that I mentioned, doorbell.net/video. And if you can't remember that, I have a card here you can pick up, help your memory.
Thank you very much, Laddie, and thank you all for coming, sharing your stories, and what a great program. Thank you.
Thank you very much for coming. I hope you all enjoyed it. I didn't actually tell a story, but I was also not from Jacksonport. I'm from Sturgeon Bay, but my aunt was a teacher in Southern Shore. She taught at Silverdale School. So when Sturgeon Bay had breaks, my friends thought we were crazy because we went out to school at Silverdale. Her name was Gertrude Jennerjohn. She was a teacher forever. And I many of the kids there through church, but I was also involved with their Christmas programs. I also saw my uncle bring the tree in, so we had to help decorate the tree. We made ornaments. We did all kinds of stuff. And that was a Sturgeon Bay kid going to a one-room schoolhouse, and my friends thought we were crazy.
Thank you,
I'm glad you all came. I hope you enjoyed it, and hopefully in the future we can have more. The way things are going these days, you never know. But have a safe trip home. You can stay and talk if you would like, but have time.
If you didn't tell a story because you didn't want to say it in front of everyone, Laddie's going to be here. He'd like to tape your story, and he'll stay as long as you've got a story to tell. So thank you very much. Good night.